All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is our third and final seminar of the semester, And today we have Dr. Zach Brym. Zach is an associate professor at TREC down in Homestead. Zach has been with us for a few years now, and he's done a lot of things, but what he's most known for as Mr. Hemp. He has taken the lead on the hemp project that came along a few years ago and has really pulled together a huge consortium of collaborators, both in-state and out-of-state, academic, government, and industry. So Zach has recently made it across the hurdle of promotion and tenure, and we wanted to give him this opportunity to do a little look back and look forward about what he's done to be successful up to this point, what his vision is for the future. And with that, Zach, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that a lot, and the opportunity to be here, the opportunity to reintroduce myself. This has been a unique experience for me in a number of different ways, pulling together this presentation, thinking about how I got here, I think was the assignment, talking about some of the ways that I pulled together a program. And so it's a really uniquely intimate type of presentation. The one where I'm going to share some things about my choices, about my path, about who I am, and hopefully come up with a cohesive message about how I got here. Let's see, this button. This button?
Maybe you could just click on the screen.
All right, there we go. So this is where I get to start. Hey, everybody, I'm Zach. And pretty much the rest of the presentation is going to be about who I am and how I got here. So UF-IFAS gave me the call as I was applying to jobs across the country, the Agronomy department at the Tropical Research and Education Center. And so it's a 60% research and 40% extension. And this split is really kind of the main feature behind how it is we're evaluated every year, about how it is that we're evaluated for tenure. And so this is kind of who I am. But not just this research and extension split, but really what I came to appreciate is the resources and the responsibility that comes along with representing all of these folks. The work that I do day to day is supposed to have this nice simple split between research extension. So developing new knowledge is the research part, and the extension part is the getting that knowledge to people who need it in order to use it in their regular life. And also kind of developing the resources in order to do that work. And so I at least include a couple, an example of the sorts of folks that were able to support my research and extension efforts, national level, state level, and private folks as well, industry as it's called. And so with this is the opportunity that I have to develop a program. And so it's an opportunity with enthusiasm, but opportunity also with the question mark. Like, how do you take this responsibility and these resources and make it into something that gets you through the tenure? So kind of cutting to the chase, as my colleagues before me acknowledged, it's like, what's the job that you're supposed to do here? Well, 60% research, 40% extension, but really the job is to get tenure. And so it's a mix of that opportunity and a mix of that responsibility that I had to make personal choices. The map for that opportunity is these primarily four things: to fill these buckets, to put out the output, the grants that get the money to do the work, the publications that show the work was done, the students that develop the next generation of scientists. And of course, we're here at the university to be of service. And as long as you're able to take your abundant opportunity and put it into these four buckets, then you're able to do your job. There was a lot of learning that got there and a lot of reflection. I've heard this term ego in a couple different ways over the last few days, interestingly, in conversation, not always from the positive perspective. But from the perspective that I, as an individual, as a scientist, have to develop a program, and the expectation is to show distinction, it all kind of comes down to me. And again, the presentation today is to show a bit about me and how I got here. And I just wanted to take an extra moment to kind of talk about the opportunity and the expectation that is to get a PhD. Dr. Zachary Brym is who I am. I have a PhD, and for me, I took the opportunity to think deeply about what that means, that there is philosophy to the work that I do. I have a vision for how I generate knowledge, and really try to do that through experience. So this is my map through opportunity, and the rest of the talk kind of passes through these phases of my early career. So I got the job in 2017. So there's just a little bit about who I was and what I was doing before I started at the university. Of course, all of that experience and training leads up to who I am and what I do in this position. Quick beginning was sort of me in the first year, kind of wondering what my job is and how it is that I'm supposed to do it. And then as Dr. Farrell mentioned, I kind of quickly got the assignment to be the hemp specialist for the state of Florida. And that really took me on a ride. It was always Trek agroecology, and then kind of the pitch and who I am today is the Florida agroecologist. And so if you kind of come along with me, you get a sense of who I am, you believe in what I'm doing, then I hope we can be friends. The before years, I did my training at the University of Michigan, both in ecology and evolutionary biology for my undergrad, and then the School of Natural Resources and Environment for my master's degree. Utah State was where I did my PhD. So what do you need to know about me as far as who I am and how I got here? For me, it's about nature. Nature feeds my inner soul. I take immense joy out of being in nature with my family and taking the steps to protect nature. This is what I do as the extrovert. I'm a drummer, and being loud and noisy is kind of the other side of things. I was in the drum line at Michigan and followed in my dad's footsteps in this fife and drum corps back in Connecticut, where we represent the Navy of 1812. It's not just all the military drumming, but I also like drum kit, and this is kind of where I set up my understanding of community. My first real job, which I don't really know that I have a real job ever in my career, but it was a baseball umpire. You see me here as a kid. This is Little League. I ended up getting picked up by the Greater New Haven Association. I was certified. I did college ball as a high schooler, and got into the competitions as well. All of this to say, like, this is who I am. This is the way that I think about life, and the way that I think about science. So how did I get to be an ecologist? My first batch of training. This is me with a saw held by a string up in the canopy of Michigan. I'm pulling down leaves so we can calculate the leaf traits. What you need to know about this graphic is that the bar in red is an invasive species. And so I wanted to know if there was a new niche space that we can articulate for the invasive species that was in this forest. I later on did a transplant study across grasslands, edge habitat, and forests to understand kind of where this invasive shrub, Elaeagnus umbellata, or autumn olive, would be found in the native habitats of Florida. I also wanted to acknowledge, I didn't put a picture here, but this was the same time that I also took a study abroad program to New Zealand. And spend a lot of time thinking about a new place and the ecology there. But also it was the first time that I was really intimately involved with my food, that we sort of knew the farmers, that the food was being distributed to the research station. And it was obviously very much a part of the balance between, this is an island nation, right? So you can't really escape producing food and being responsible for that. So then I went to Utah State, and I also found a farm, a 2-acre farm, to do agroecology at the same time as I was studying agroecology. So here's some of my turkeys and a plum tree. We also did the livestock, the goats we would milk twice a day, make cheese out of it. And what we are known for in the community was our chickens and our ducks. We sold the eggs and the meat at market, and we also had about 1,000 square feet of garden space where we had 72 different types of tomatoes and 6 different types of broccoli and on. Really flavors the type of work that I do. I tell folks that I probably did most of my best writing for my dissertation, just taking care of weeds and chickens on the farm. But of course, I also had to do the science thing. And so this is me at one of the research stations for Utah State. I was the crazy guy who was like, can I cut down these trees one branch at a time? And I did so in a way that I was able to digitally reconstruct the trees and then compete the models of how we know plants grow in natural settings with what we experienced the orchard fruit to grow. I did this both in a tart cherry system. This is a 30-year-old tree here. And then just as I finished my proposal and a comprehensive exams, I was told that there was also an apple orchard with a bunch of different varieties that I'd have the chance to cut down. And so immediately my proposal was tossed out the window and I had a new opportunity to experience. So not just competing the theory of how we know nature operates with how we understand agriculture or horticulture to operate, I wanted to get out and be involved in the commercial settings. And so this is Santaquin, Utah, the neighborhood of where some of the filming of Footloose occurred, but also where the dried tart cherries process was invented. And these folks found it really funny when my advisor at the time brought me and introduced me. Hey, this is the guy I told you about that cut down all the trees. And they're immediately like, well, what's he doing here? And so I had to learn quickly about how to talk to farmers and go along with a situation like that. And I promised them I already learned enough by cutting down the trees. I don't need to cut down your trees, but I'd really like to take some meticulous measurements. And they were very supportive of that and have since learned from some of our work about how tree size develops and how production turns over in time. So just last couple of minutes about me before I get into the crux of my experience at UF-IFAS. I really like mashups of my interests. And so here you see me with the pruning. I thought I was going to be a pruning expert someday. And of course, life takes you in interesting directions. But I also worked in a community college. They invited me to give a presentation and I taught the basics of pruning at the same time as I taught the basics of drumming. And like, could you stretch your brain to understand both? And maybe you get a little bit of both. I also submitted a Dance Your PhD video where I tried to, with interpretive dance, to describe the interests and output of my PhD. So to summarize kind of who I am and what I'm up to, I'm really inspired and motivated to grow plants and people. I really think about the world in terms of games and simulations, of course, both from the can we have fun and what do we know from our data. Furthermore, the universal patterns for life by understanding the worlds in this way. And we're all kind of teachers here, and so it's got to be a compelling performance. So the quick beginning, 2017, I got the call to University of Florida. I guess it was 2016 when I got the call technically. I started the job in January 2017, and it was a standing start for me. There was not a postdoc that I had. I went right from my PhD to the job at Trek. I was the first agronomist at the research station, and I was the first agroecologist with the name at the university. I understand and acknowledge the agroecology scientists that come before me here in agronomy department. A lot of amazing work in agroecology, but I was the first one with an extension appointment to have been given the responsibility to take on this charge. And so how did I jump in and what was I doing when I was still trying to figure out what my job would be like? Well, I realized that there was a natural area at Trek, and I decided very quickly that that was an important initiative for me. Even if it wouldn't get me points for tenure, I wanted to be a steward of this natural area. You can see a burn that we accomplished in 2018. Very quickly set out to develop plant diversity surveys using the NEON, National Ecological Observatory Network protocol, and just trying to track as many plants as possible. And got involved in a couple different locations. The picture of me with this very low-tech cultivator is at Echo Global Farm, and we replicated a cover crop study both in Fort Myers there at Echo and at Trek in Homestead. So just a moment about agroecology at Trek. If you don't know anything about the Redland Ag District, we're kind of in the southwest corner of Miami. So the red there in the map is the, let's see if I can get this. The red there is all the urban zone, and then the brown is some of the agriculture. And we're at the Tropical Research and Education Center is an 80 acre research station. And if you're so kind to call this soil, then I'll accept it, but really it's rock at the surface. In order to do agriculture and homestead, we literally have to crush up the bedrock, take the rock and make it into agricultural soil. They call it chrome gravelly loam. It's about 65% rocky gravel. It's about 8.2 to 8.5 pH. So there's a lot going on that I had to learn. Also tried to get into a tractor, right? Now all of a sudden I'm an agronomist. Let me figure out how to do this. So I took some time to get the pesticide applicator's license and do some training in a tractor. So just to like try to start filling out my thoughts about agroecology and how I could do that at a research station, just to point out these different types of agricultural systems. I think this was the most inspiring feature of getting a job at Trek. There's just so many different types of plants, so many different types of agriculture going on, and that was very much about what I wanted to do with my job. And so this is just for example, agroecosystems, thanks to the Early Career Seed Award from IFAS Research, picked 4 different sites, put down weather stations, started tracking cover crop experiments, and really trying to develop my philosophy and approach to agroecology. And then this happened. So the way that I recall the story, and nobody's told me I recall it differently, was that the law was changing. There was this mandate from the state of Florida that the land grant institutions in the state would develop a 2-year hemp pilot project. And so Rob Gilbert at the time, who was agronomy chair, goes around and says, there's this thing going on. Are you interested? And it kind of fit my bill, like plant diversity is my thing and cropping systems is an interest of mine. And so it was like, oh, a new plant to the state. What an interesting opportunity to study agroecology. And so I said, okay, I'm hesitantly interested. And then a couple of weeks go by and he comes back to me. He says, so you're the only one that said you were interested. Let me tell you how this works. And then I became the hemp guy, right? And I think one of the smartest things that I did in that period was to very specifically say, I'll accept this assignment, but I don't think I can do it myself and I need help. And so I had a lot of opportunity to learn about how IFAS works because I had to develop permits, because I had to develop a research program with a legislative mandate. There was a lot of things, and you can see Jack Payne here speaking in front of a workshop that I hosted at Citra. It's 200 people that are squeezed into this room. Rob eventually acknowledged this phase of my career as the gravy before the meat and potatoes. And I stand before you today showing that I have some meat and potatoes as well. So one of those things that I did was develop a team. It wasn't ever going to be just me doing this hemp thing, but it really had to be an opportunity for IFAS to do this hemp, and I happened to be at the helm. And so special thanks here to Jerry Fankhauser, who's graced me with his presence today. He took on some of the oversight role, and several other people here in the photos. So more than 30 faculty, 11 units. It was a really amazing opportunity for me to give a lot of people an opportunity to work in this crop. I mentioned the permits, so I had this fun experience where there was this law that said there should be permits, and we took the law and we developed a permit application, and then we submitted it to FDACS, and we got the permit approved. And then they said, but hang on a second, we don't actually have a permit to give you. We have to get the permit drafted and approved through the legal team, so we have a document that we can sign for you to be permitted to do this work. So eventually we mounted to 42 permits across UF locations and a number of on-farm partners that we brought into a project in 2020. But really just a whole mess of firsts and a whole mess of learning opportunities for me. And it wasn't without productivity, right? We spent some time working with people, and this is some of the output of our on-farm trial and some of the focus groups that we would eventually do. I might have flipped through a couple slides, but I do want to acknowledge something here, which is at the bottom of the screen, I've got sort of citations here. And there was something that I had to learn as a young assistant professor, which was you come along with the responsibility and the opportunity to represent IFAS, and you can speak as an expert wearing the shirt that says UF IFAS. But it wasn't until I started publishing, so this is 2021. So in 2018, I started this. Publications didn't really start to come out until 2020, 2021. And as that happened, I started to really settle into what I felt confident about my expertise. See, I got this work through peer review, and it really made a difference for the way that I was talking. It was also around the same time where I started to get phone calls from mentors and colleagues like Luke Flory, like, hey, remember you're supposed to be publishing. And it took a lot of time to get there, but it was also an aha moment that, oh, what is my job? Well, I thought my job was to be the hemp guy. I got that assignment from my chair, right? But also there's eventually a tenure and promotion that you have to be responsible for. And I had to get back on that, that route. So with a couple of different resources here and publications, we know now from a number of different evidence that hemp can grow in Florida. We also know that hemp needs fertilizer to grow in Florida. That might sound obvious, but when you start talking to people enthusiastic about hemp, they go, hey, it grows like a weed, right? It's good for the environment, right? Okay, well, this crop in some cases takes on some of the moderate to high levels of fertilizer when comparing it to other crops. And so this was something that we had to learn and something that we had to put research to in order to speak to plainly. I'd also acknowledge that this was one of the mandates that came through. By there being hemp in the state of Florida, the Department of Agriculture has to have a best management practice so the farmers can be under compliance in the nutrient management recommendations. So very quickly, and it took 3 to 5 years, we had to put together the research program to have a nutrient management recommendation. And so that was something that was published last year in 2024. Now, after all this, let me acknowledge that there's not much hemp in Florida. Okay, so you can see in 2020, when they first allowed commercial permits, just to point out, I didn't get a full 2 years of a pilot project before this happened. 2020, 23,000 acres were approved for hemp production, but we only had 250 acres for approval, right? This is a specially regulated crop. If you are going to sell it commercially, you have to get approval to harvest it. What is the approval benchmark? THC less than 0.3% is the expectation for and distinction between hemp and marijuana. And so hemp farmers who go through harvest have to approve with the state of Florida that they're indeed harvesting hemp and not something different. So that was kind of the first year. The market was already flooded by 2019 from the states in the West. And very quickly, we see the acreage diminish. Here in 2023, we have reported 32 acres approved for harvest. So what's going on here? It's not that there's no hemp in Florida, but what it is happening is instead of the large acreage fiber and seed production, we have the much smaller flower production occurring indoors. And so there's 190 different harvests, but they only amount to 32 acres. Now, the last thing that I wanted to say here at this segment was that at the same time as we're developing this research and tracking the hemp industry, being available to them as a resource, we're also under a situation where we shouldn't be recommending hemp for production. That was not my job to go out and say, plant hemp, everybody. My job was to provide the best available information for what's going on with hemp. And so this is where we are today. Just to preface the discussion, going into this, we knew by assessment that hemp was a high risk of invasion. And so by policy at UF-IFAS, we're not supposed to say, go plant this crop. It could be a risk of invasion. That made it really interesting for me as an assistant professor tasked with developing a production system for this crop. Really nuanced discussion, but also much more proactively or much more appropriately, we really shouldn't be encouraging folks to plant hemp in the way that we need access to available genetics in the state, and we need the processing and markets. So we've done this. This is what I set my early career on. We spent the first 5 years developing the production guide for hemp in Florida. We have that information. We can do it for flower, we can do it for seed, we can do it for fiber. That information is available, and most of it's on track, if not for publication, if not published already. But this is what's left for me. Can fiber go in Florida? Could there be an industry there to scale up? If we're talking about sustainability in agriculture, it's hemp fiber that has the best opportunity to do so. The hemp for flower is indoors. It's pretty intensive. And if you tell me it's good for the environment, I'm going to try really hard not to laugh at you. So hey, hemp guy. That was how I was introduced pretty much for the first 5 years of my program. And it was very valuable to me to be recognized for something, right? I needed to convince the university that I was distinguished. And this is how I did that, right? I worked really hard to get external grants, both in state, federal, and private. We did put out publications, 13 publications I was able to tally by the time I went up for tenure. A whole bunch of people that moved through the program and was able to get a best thesis acknowledged, and then the service and the leadership that I was able to show from a couple awards. But even so, throughout all of that, I would get introduced as the hemp guy, and I would say, hey, I do agroecology too. And very much as I was understanding what it took to develop a program, it wasn't about just all things hemp or agronomy of hemp or hemp production. For me, it was very much about how can hemp service my interest in agroecology. And so this picture here on the left is a picture of a hemp from a study that we did. We did an abandonment trial. What would happen if someone abandoned a hemp field and just left it there? Well, we tracked hemp to come back as volunteers for 2 years. And that publication is in revision currently. I very much kept a focus on reducing inputs. And so we didn't have pesticides. Well, first of all, there aren't regulated pesticides available for hemp, so I wasn't going to break the law in that way. But also, we were able to track the biodiversity like this rider spider here. We are interested in the sort of technology that we can use to monitor our system. And here's some intercropping with cowpea hemp that we're doing currently as part of NRCS Climate Smart Agriculture project. So kind of moved from all things hemp towards hemp agroecology. And that's a very something that I'm proud of. How am I doing? All right. And this is just a moment like, hey, I want to do agroecology, but I also do this thing, which I won't have a chance to talk about more in my presentation. But as I was developing a program in Homestead surrounded by horticulture, as I was going around the state doing this thing for hemp, I also wanted to make sure that I had meaningful interactions with the agronomy department. That was a part of my identity. I wanted to be understood as an agronomist as well. And so I've had the opportunity to get involved with some of these projects. Peanut aflatoxin is a health concern. It's an issue for international shipments of peanuts, and it happens to be a very challenging agroecological problem. And so we developed the models, statistical at this stage, and eventually incorporating crop process modeling to begin to address some of this effort. And I'll acknowledge a first author publication from one of my PhD students. She's still in her program, but we were able to make this project go. Okay, I think I'm doing all right. but I was an agroecologist all along, right? From 2017 to 2023, there was always something going on in the background where I wanted to do agroecology. I wanted to make that a key feature of my program. And so for that, I just want to take the moment before I run out of time to say thank you to all of these people. Postdocs and students are pictured across the top. You can see me with the team photos throughout. And without naming everybody individually, just a really big thank you to the Agroecology Lab. If you ask me what's my favorite part about this job, it's this, right? Working with these students, working with these people that are inspired to be the next generation of scientists, that sort of see me as a resource and a mentor to do that. I've seen a lot of these people go on to the next better thing. And as much as that kind of adds some stress into my program, how am I ever going to replace them? It's exactly what I'm here to do, to give them that opportunity to move on. And so not just the thanks to the students and the folks on my team, but really thanks to everyone that's had a chance to work with me, a chance to mentor me. A special thanks to the mentors and my family for their support along the way. And the people that would participate in my events, the folks that are doing the work at the research station, and really helping me put together all of these things that I get to stand before you today and describe as output of my program. It's very much a we, and I wanted to make sure to take an extra moment to say that. Thank you. So what do I really want to be doing? I want to do plant diversity in agriculture and natural areas. I want to track plant diversity from the perspective of what's occurring in nature to the perspective of the types of choices that we make in agriculture, and then sort of the boundary where things are in between. And so we participated with a Jumpstart project to survey a number of the natural areas in Miami-Dade County, but also use the similar methods between those natural areas, nearby lawn habitats, and the research station. So there's value to tropical plant diversity and really plant diversity at large. And that's what I'm here to talk about, what I'm here to study. And so this is a little bit outdated. It's a number from 2022, 2023. But one of the early things that I did was hire a botanist to my team. So Dr. Cliff Martin has been spending the last 6-7 years identifying the plant species at the quarter square mile that is Trek. So 2024, our number is more like 840. But I think it's amazing the sort of work that we've been able to do to become familiar with these systems, right? Let me remind you, I grew up in Connecticut. I studied in Michigan and Utah. And then someone's like, yeah, let's bring this guy to Miami and get him to do agroecology. So I very quickly had to learn a whole new community of species, a whole new system, and very much took those lessons that I learned in temperate zones and tried to combat them with what I was experiencing in Homestead. So these 288 species that are native at Trek, we have 31 that are endemic and imperiled. But what I think is most impressive is that in that quarter square mile, if we assume that there's about 3,000 native plant species in Florida, our quarter square mile represents 10% of that total. And we're definitely not 10% of the state, right? So there's really a biodiversity hotspot here at Trek, and it's really inspiring to have the opportunity to do that work. Now, if you add the non-natives, and this is a really interesting debate that I love to get into, like what's the definition of invasive species? When does a naturalized species get reclassified into invasive? How do you have the expertise and the science to support that work? So if you just include what's living there, and we understand it to have originated here, but also what's living there and survives there without our assistance, we get up to about 12% of what's assumed to live in Florida. The rest of the species then are the non-native, not established what occurs there because we keep it alive. And then, of course, the Cliff's, Dr. Martin's nag is always getting this 41 uncertain, a little bit more certain. And that's his passion. Okay, so I introduced these agroecosystems at Trek a little bit earlier, and I did want to take a moment to talk about some of the science that we did there. It was a cover crop study. It was a competition study, growing these cover crops in monoculture and mixtures. So there's three that I thought of early on as a new faculty to South Florida, trying to learn from my colleagues and predecessors. And the favorites were sun hemp, Crotalaria junciae, and sorghum Sudan grass. And then some folks had done some work with this one, Mucuna puriens, which is velvet bean. Now, let me acknowledge that I lost a graduate student because I had her work with velvet bean. And I've also experienced some of this at my kids' school, where they have a food forest overrun with velvet bean. Mucuna puriens is an invasive species. What it was doing in my cover crop system, I still have to reconcile with, but it's also something that we had to learn, right? A plant that was a good candidate for an agricultural system also happened to be an invasive species. If you don't get the right Mucuna puriens, which is recommended for cover crops, it happens to be the most violent itch that you've ever had. It'll stain your clothes and you'll be itchy for a day. And certainly nobody should be asked to work under those conditions. And so there was a lot of learning right away. We eradicated all of the individuals from the station, and we cleared that up of our program, but it's a little bit of the story to tell. So here's also what we did. The old agriculture on the left has been agriculture for more than 30 years. It's been continuously plowed and disked, kind of like excessively in a way. But then also here I am, the agroecologist that decided to disturb the soil, cut down some trees and break up the soil so that I can do a study. Just a small fragment, 400 square meter fragment, but I also had to really motivate some of my studies. So you can see the organic matter pre our cover crops here, so it's 6% organic matter, which you might be really impressed of, but remember that's in between 65% gravel. So you can do the math how you'd like to. It's still probably some of the highest organic matter that you've seen in the state, but it's not the wonderfully inviting sort of environment for a plant. Now, if you took a lawn habitat and freshly prepared it into soil, of course, all of that organic matter is going to be there. Now, even so, after we did the cover crop study, you can see elevations in the organic matter across all the sites. So when it comes down to like, what is a key feature of agroecology? Well, let's develop soil organic matter. What's the best way to do that? There's a mix between lowering disturbance and incorporating plant biomass, and there's got to be a balance there. But also, because there was more organic matter in the new habitat, there was more breath. There was more gas exchange in the new soil. So does that mean that we're losing soil? It could be in a way. That was a publication that we put together with one of the PhD students who started that project. We also worked with a master's student who came through the USAID project through Haiti, and she did this litter decay study. And this was another something that I had to learn, right? Why do you use cover crops? Well, for organic matter and maybe some nitrogen credit. But here you can see just in the course of a couple months, most of the nitrogen is gone, right? Even like in the first week, most of the nitrogen is gone. And the same thing for the carbon. So these plants really cook in Homestead. It's really hot and humid when these plants are being terminated at the end of the summer. And so it was, again, something that really contested some of those universal rules of everybody should be planting cover crops. Well, let's be clear of why we're doing it. Primarily in Homestead, cover crops are being used for reducing weed pressure, so you don't have to disc all summer, and also used for nematode suppression. So we left it fallow for a few years, and at least the new ag, we left fallow, and the old ag, we just kind of tracked. And even by doing cover crops repeatedly for a couple of years, I think this was something that was really impressive to me. So the organic matter was stable in both of the systems. So it really left me with some hope that we could maintain organic matter in these soils, and really helps me describe what a feature of my framework in agroecology sets up as a goal. So I mentioned the plant diversity again, and I wanted to show this graphic for some of the analysis that we do, right? There's science in plant diversity, and this is really what I've been trained to do. And so this is an analytical space. The colors match here, the old in the west and the east, the new in the west and the east. And then we've got plots in the ag and plots in the lawn. And so if you kind of see what's being grouped here, you see the lawn habitats being grouped and the ag habitats being grouped. And that's not necessarily surprising, but this is a way that we can understand this habitat or vegetative structure using analytical techniques. And what was really cool to see was we revisited these sites after 2023. We left the new sites left fallow, right? We weren't doing agriculture there. The plowed sites maintained their agriculture. And what you see is that the plant community kind of shifts back towards the lawn. And so there's an opportunity for conservation here as well, that it's not just ag is the disturbance and we'll never get back, but there can be some meaningful opportunities to think deeply about how we manage agriculture, especially within the perspective of plant diversity. Okay, so with the last few minutes, again, under the spirit of reintroducing myself, I would like to describe my philosophy as the Florida agroecologist. And so up to this point, you still might have this nagging question. So what is agroecology, right? And here it is, another mashup, the agro and the ecology. So the agro is the farming and the ecology is the way that we understand nature to operate. And so what is the key feature between agriculture and nature that makes those separate systems? Well, in my perspective, it is intentional productivity. So in agriculture, we're there and we're managing for productivity. In ecology, in many cases, we're still managing, but the purpose is to maintain biodiversity and natural processes. If you're interested in reading more, this was a publication that we put out in 2023. It took me that long to develop the framework in agroecology and get it into the extension service. And so the sustainability goals that folks are thoughtful about in agroecology, that production, the environment, and the society are really key features of the work that I do. And how can we get them to work together? Well, from the framework of what matters from the perspective of principles and practices, I've mentioned the productivity. That's the feature that really makes this system agriculture. Now, I mean productivity in as many different ways as you can think about. Is it just net primary productivity? What makes our planet green, right? The plants are the background. The plants are the foundation of life on Earth. But there's also the carbon that's in the plant and the nutrients. And if we're thinking about agronomy, then there's yield and productivity from the perspective of income that we get to our farmers. In many cases, these systems have to be businesses. They have to operate as businesses, and we have to be thoughtful about that. Now, the complement is it's not just all about productivity, but there's got to be something about diversity as well. The diversity of crops, the diversity of plants, the diversity of life in that system. And thinking about these trade-offs in productivity and diversity in the long term is how we get to resilience. And so can we respond to disturbances? We're all familiar in Florida with high winds, with a lot of water. And so how do we develop our system so it's not just relying on the insurance and the relief after a disaster, but developing our system so that we're prepared to take on that disaster, making choices so that we can be resilient to changes in the market, changes in the society. And then the fourth feature that is agroecology is systems, that we're thinking about the boundaries and about how things interact biologically, ecologically, socially, and environmentally. So just to breeze through some of these graphics that we put together, thank you so much to the team that helped me do that. This is a conceptual diagram of an agro-ecosystem and the different parts and the different features. This is very much kind of a fundamental lesson development in ecology, but one that I put specifically to agriculture, where there's the focal crop, where there's the people in the system, and the features. And so if you're wondering who I am as a scientist, this is my sweet spot, right? The mix between whole plant physiology and the sort of agronomy that we would do at a population level. the horticulture that we would do at a population level, but more specifically, the mix of plants in a community and agricultural systems. Is it the cover crops? Is it the hedgerows? Is it the crops that we select for our farms? Is it the weeds and the other sorts of ground covers? There are ground covers that are native plants that happen to be a conservation opportunity, and those are the sorts of things that I like to think about. All right, so maybe you don't fit in that initial graphic for an agro-ecosystem, but I hope if you look at these 9 panels, you'll be able to put yourself into one of them. And so the agriculture zone is in the focal point here, nature's over here, and the city's over here, right? And the goal is to be thinking about how these systems interact, how we might develop a food system, an agro-ecosystem that'll feed our community, that'll develop enterprising opportunities for our farms and our farming business. And of course, we got fewer plants here. That's not the goal. Everybody knows why. More plants down here. That's the vision. And so I hope you can see yourself in this diagram and understand why you might be kind of inspired to take on some of the goals of agroecology. So I couldn't just talk about it, as you saw from my farm back in my PhD, but I also had to do it. And so this is a 3-acre plot of land at Trek. You see the fence here. Well, the fence got put here in 2019 because the university said I needed to fence out the high schoolers from my hemp studies. And there needed to be that extra layer of security. But also, after doing that first hemp variety trial in 2019, this was where the first legal hemp plants were in the state of Florida in more than 60 years. And so it also happened to be trenched for limes. I really wish someone had told me that every 20 feet there was a 3-foot dip in the soil profile, but I didn't know that until I had all of these different height hemp plants and was like, hey, what's going on? So I had to make an argument. We moved the hemp out of the fence. We finally got the, understanding from the university that fence in the outside of the station was enough and all sorts of other security protocols, but then I left it fallow. For 3 years, it transitioned to organic. And then I brought together a community of my peers in Miami and across the state to talk to me about how we can develop this space. And so we've got a crop rotation system here, developing the cover crops and eventually the vegetables for organic matter. We've got the orchard over here. You have to like drill a hole in the ground to develop an orchard in Homestead. And so we put 164 holes where we've got some native trees and some crop plants as well. We made some space for an apiary to have some of those livestock. And we're close pretty to this year 1 mark and the goal here. You can see that I'm breaking these up into habitats into the different zones. And that's a critical feature of agroecology. And eventually we'd like to get here. Someone was like, hey, this looks like a really great space for some chickens. And I was like, thank you very much. I didn't have to say that myself. I agree. It would take someone at the station to be available to the chickens twice a day, and I'm not sure what that would take, but it's a part of our vision here at Trek for Agro-Eco Park. And so really the doing agroecology, to summarize where we're going, what's the goal? More plants, more soil, more nature. And just to kind of summarize where we are, we've gone from this kind of open, fallow transition to organic space to 95% total plant cover. We got 65 different species there and a nice mix that we're hoping to get to 60% ag from 100% ag, 20% for nature, and eventually 20% for community space as well in this framework, what we call urban. So this is what I was able to do. This was the pitch that I made, right? The mentors had to remind me, hey, it's not just about these interesting things that you're up to and these projects that you're putting together, but you have to have the packet. And the number of bosses that I had really made me appreciate that it came down to the packet, right? That it couldn't just be this person that was mentoring me for a number of years and can be a champion of mine when I went up for tenure and promotion, but that there really had to be substance to what was going on. And I don't necessarily have to go through these details, but suffice to say, I got the grants, I got the publications, I got the students, and I put in the service and acknowledgement of that through awards. So I got to grow my program to my next phase. And this is just a summary of what I'd like to be up to. Plan ID, selection and management, thinking about land use deeply from the perspective of agriculture and conservation. Really, my training in agroecology from a statistics and a data perspective is data standards, and I'd really like to do long-term research if I have the opportunity, developing that rigorous evidence and practical examples from the work. But perhaps more specifically, we can't do any of this work devoid of people, and so also developing that community and the real-world impact. So these are a couple of initiatives that I've got going on, doing some fiber hemp, as I showed you, with the cover crops and some algae, doing some land restoration, working with the agrivoltaics project, and eventually, if I can make some friends, developing a hub for agroecology where we can share news and ideas, maybe play some games, and eventually have a thoughtful conversation. So my last minute, I wanted to sort of leave the talk with a piece of advice or a way that I can describe, like, if your map is good and your opportunity is good, how do you know along the way that you're doing a good job? And one of the things that I've sat into as being a meaningful way to recognize that is thinking about weeks where I've done all the things, that I made progress on a grant, that I've done work with a student, that I have developed a publication, piece of extension and service. And so this is just recently, the last week or so, I sat down and I was like, wow, this was an amazing week. I got 2 master's students accepted for graduation. 2 students had their first author papers accepted for publication. I had developed a draft grant letter for intent and the sort of team that comes along with doing that. I had a extension talk in a new audience. I happened to see some arborists, right? I love trees, okay? I didn't have a chance to show a picture collage like that, but that's really part of my passion with nature. And I got a chance to see some friends at the presentation as well I didn't expect. A hemp farmer from Homestead decided to knock on my door, said, I need some help. And I was like, well, you found us. Let's talk about your nutrients. And then there was a random encounter that same week that I had someone in a tea and spice shop. I happened to also be a horticulture student, and was really exciting to hear when I saw a spoon with a bunch of different wood that I was inspired. And I said, hey, this is what I do for work. I study trees and plants. And she's like, wow, I'd like to do that too. And so this was one of those examples of a golden week where I was able to accomplish all the things in the kind of abundant responsibility that I have. So hi, everybody. I'm Zach, Florida agroecologist. I got tenure, and thank you very much for coming to my talk. I'm supposed to ask for questions. Okay. I'm also trying to come over here to the chat to see if someone's here. All right. Hi, Kara. Thank you for the question. It's a few questions. All right. So opportunities for community colleges is the question. And it's certainly something we actively do at Trek. So Miami-Dade Community College has a campus in Homestead. And one of the things we do is invite aspiring students for agriculture to come and have an internship at the research station. At one point, they were like, hey, let's start a garden. And I said, that's amazing. Who's going to do it? And that's where the conversation stopped. But at least we provide a resource for folks in that way. I also have a very inspiring relationship with Barry University in Miami. It happens to be 90 minutes away if I pick the wrong time of day to get there. But these are universities that have students that like to see themselves in a career in agriculture, but don't necessarily have the opportunity to have those real world agriculture experiences. Have you heard any interest in cover crops reaching beginner farmers? I think that's really one of the entry levels, and one of the things that I'd like to do better in developing my program to get to tenure. The last couple of years have been very much about getting the students through, getting the publications through. I had done my statewide tour of Florida as the hemp guy early on in my career, making connections, but never really had a chance to get on farm outside of the on-farm trials. So I still maintain connection with a lot of those folks, but absolutely with my opportunity, I'd love to meet new folks and would really set some of my priority in the next couple of years to going around and visiting farms, right? You don't get a lot of credit per se to spending your time doing that traveling and meeting with those folks, but it's really where my passion is. Okay, Kara, I'm going to have before I answer your third question, I'll see if anybody else in the room has another question. Should take a deep breath too.
Yeah, do that, Zach. I'm curious about the organic matter explanation. I saw actually in the dean's office, they have all the soils from all the RECs across the state. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's amazing to see them all side by side. And they have a homestead gravel soil. So
Yeah.
the organic matter you're talking about, that's the, if you don't count the gravel.
Yeah,
Gravel isn't part of the soil. I mean,
not when you go through the protocol, right? The
Go through
protocol
it.
is to sieve through 2 millimeters.
Yeah.
And none of the gravel is going to
Right.
come through the 2 millimeters. So then it's more of a test in between the gravel. So like, do you crush up the rock and pass it through the 2 millimeters? This has been a major barrier functionally and practically for me in Homestead, because I could be involved in the cover crop research, or I could be involved in the soil health research, but someone says, and use this protocol or use this plant list in your study. And I'm like, you want me to do what now? Like take this soil corer that's $1,000 and like break it up against the rock? It doesn't, oh, you're just using a trowel? Well, you tell me a better way to do it. And so there's been a lot that I've learned by doing this work at the extreme. And it's been a very fascinating experience, both practically and theoretically. So
can you average in the volume or some measure of what would, because presumably there's zero organic matter in the gravel. So if you average that in, then what do you get?
You get about half and a little bit less than half. So when folks hear like 2 to 3% organic matter in Florida, they still do a dance, right? At least if you're in Central Florida. North Florida probably matches that a little bit. And so then it's about like thinking about how root structures, and that's a whole nother part of my program. I was very much involved in root research as part of my early career. I had a PhD student that did a whole set of work with sesame roots. And so thinking about roots and how they would penetrate around the rock, it's more about like, how do they find enough space where, and so we've seen a lot of that with the hemp roots. And, I had 2019, we had a 15-foot hemp plant. That's the tallest hemp plant I've ever had. Could I actually say realistically that the best chance I had growing hemp was the first time I ever tried? That feels silly to say, but it was 15-foot hemp plant and like 4 inches of roots. And so just a really outlandish thing to experience. Yeah, thanks. Okay.
So coming into the program, it's a big shock coming out of a graduate program into running a program as a faculty member. Can you tell us, like, what was one thing that you really had to take time to develop or learn a skill? Was it time management, people management, that you realized that you needed to really improve to do this job?
Yeah. There are sort of 2 things that come to mind. The first was really operating within a system, like an institution. And I had the opportunity to learn that quick, becoming the hemp guy. Like, I have 2 bosses. What does that mean? And the sort of requirements for budgeting and the reporting and the sorts of things that I'd be responsible for. I had some grants as a graduate student and had to produce a budget, but it was more of a, did you accomplish the work? Good job, as opposed to justify every expense that I've had and encumber funds and things like that. So those administrative roles were things that I didn't very well get trained on. But I did give myself enough time to sort of accept that that was a feature of my job that I had to be mindful of. I think the other part, which I was like the least amount that I was prepared for, was being financially responsible for others. There's just that still keeps me up at night, especially as I'm transitioning my program, thinking about how to take on some more risks in research. How dare I do that when I could risk the safety and security of the people that work for me. And so that's still something that I'm grappling with you know, from the very beginning, developing a program and trying to have enough resources, sharing with others the resources. I think some of the most successful postdocs and students I kind of co-advised or developed a partnership and allowed them to be over there, but the funds they still acknowledged came from my efforts developing the hemp project. So, you know, very much distributed and something that I had to become familiar with.
Related to that, can you speak for just a minute about the challenge of having two bosses? I assume you mean department chair versus REC director, like being at an REC, how'd you negotiate that? You seem to have done it very well.
Thank you. So to preface the situation with the facts. So I have a center director at Trek and I have a chair at Agronomy. And what's interesting is they're both my boss because they're both in part responsible for my success and both in part responsible for tenure, but they have unique responsibilities in that pairing. So center director has responsibility for my budget and agronomy chair has responsibility for my tenure. And the way that sort of gets mixed in the kind of institutional, you know, they both play into feedback for that. But that was kind of the way that I thought about it and the way that it learned. Now, at the same time, I sort of be thankful for the stability of center director at Trek the whole time. I also had a whole bunch of different agronomy bosses. And so getting to sort of navigate who would be my champion, if you will, who knew enough about me and was very excited about my program to get me new resources, to get me the opportunity to go up for tenure. That was always very interesting. So if they didn't always agree or see the project at the same time, I think there was some value to that because I had to really commit myself to resolving conflicts in that way. Then it was just kind of, this is the way the institution operates and I better accept it to be successful. I think that's okay. I don't think we have one here. So Carol asked the third question. I'll just spend the moment to do it. Undergraduate research, internship funding from the Dean of Research Office. Yes, absolutely. It's a bit of a challenge to convince a student to come down from Gainesville, or in most of the cases, they were a student who went to Gainesville, but lived in the summer in Miami, and they'd have a chance to come and spend some time at Trek. I would acknowledge the amazing programs for students here on main campus and the disconnect between the access and availability to students and their participation, their interest as it relates to having to work in an REC. I kind of took on the students in the area as a necessity, as a recruitment target. You have to kind of have something going on in Miami to be satisfied with living and working in Miami. And so that was a part of my team, always recruited out of folks that were already living in the area or had some family in the area, a reason to be in the area so that they had that support. And that's true too about the students that came through the undergraduate research internship. Another comment. Thank you everybody for coming. I think Jay has one more announcement before we adjourn.
Zach, thank you for coming and telling us about this. It's great to see what you've done. You're very far away, so it's hard to keep track on all the pieces that you're involved in. So thank you for informing us today. So everybody, let's thank our speaker one last time.